The Nintendo 64. Not only was it the first thing I ever talked about on this channel, wow that feels like ages ago, but this year also marks the 25th anniversary of the system and its two North American launch titles, Pilotwings 64 and if you're a true gamer, Super Mario 64. Mario is my personal favorite game franchise of all time, and a big reason for that is because of the 3D games. I could not tell you how great Super Mario Galaxy is, or Super Mario Odyssey, or even Super Mario 3D World despite not being a true 3D Mario game like the other entries I just mentioned. But it's still a great one, and the Bowser's Fury expansion in the Switch version makes the game that much better. But then there's Super Mario 64, the first installment in the mainline 3D Marios, which I also really love as a game, but compared to the later games, I don't think 64 is as good as them, mainly because they introduce mechanics and ideas that 64 can't really compete with nowadays. I mean, it was 1996, and this was basically the 3D platformer to define the genre and the future of gaming in general, but mechanics like the capturing mechanic in Odyssey, it's awesome and allows for progression throughout the game's many worlds to be that much more fun. Galaxy is a bit more linear than 64 and Odyssey, but makes up for it with a cinematic and more epic feeling adventure with you traversing space and the different galaxies to be found there. And then there's Super Mario Sunshine. While I actually think 64 is still better than Sunshine, Sunshine still does a few things that I think improves upon 64. But don't take that as me disliking 64. I mean, hell, without it, the gaming industry probably wouldn't even be the same as it is today. Again, 64 is still a great game, but I just think later games improve upon it in their own way. But even if you don't like 64, which is that even possible, you have to at the very least appreciate it for what it did for the video game industry. So, for today's video commemorating the 25th anniversary of the Nintendo 64, I'm going to talk about Super Mario 64 on the Nintendo 64. I could have just made a video about the Nintendo 64 itself, but that video just so happens to be the first video on my channel, and the worst thing ever, so instead I'm going to make a video about the Mario game that launched with the system. I really should remake that video at some point. Since we're checking out 3D Mario today, take a look at the video I made for Mario Sunshine a while back. But moving off of the nostalgic talk here, let's start talking about Super Mario 64. In Super Mario 3D All-Stars. Wow, I really do care. Super Mario 64 was developed by Nintendo Entertainment Analysis and Development, or Nintendo EAD, which would eventually become Nintendo Entertainment Planning and Development, or Nintendo EPD, in 2015. The game was also shown off at Space World 1995 along with the Ultra 64, the Nintendo 64's original name. And 1995 would have been the perfect time to launch the system to compete with the Sega Saturn and the Nintendo 64's other rival, the Sony PlayStation. However, it was not finished yet, so it had to be delayed. But eventually Mario and the newly renamed Nintendo 64 launched in September 1996, at least in North America. And in Japan it arrived 2 months before in July, and in Europe it came a whopping year later in 97, which wow, the 64 was really late to the competition there. A lot of people consider Mario 64 to be one of the best and most revolutionary games of all time because of the debut of elements like a rotatable camera and how it basically served as the basis for all 3D games going forward. But while Mario 64 might have been revolutionary and new 25 years ago, the game definitely shows its age now. The camera feels a bit more restrictive with you not being able to fully rotate it in some parts of the game. The visuals, and this might be more of an issue with all 3D games in the 90s, the visuals really don't hold up. I mean, the game is basically made of a bunch of differently colored polygons, so there's not much to be surprised by in that aspect, though it is kind of iconic. And you returning back to the hub world every time you complete an objective is kinda cumbersome, especially after the other Nintendo 64 3D platformer Banjo-Kazooie along with the more recent Mario games like Odyssey ditched this aspect entirely. Since this is Mario's first true 3D game, not counting any Mario game on Virtual Boy here, Mario's moveset has now been fully expanded upon his 2D games with more than just running and jumping. Well, technically Donkey Kong 94 was what introduced Mario's more acrobatic side, but this is the first true 3D Mario game where his moveset has been truly expanded. He can now double jump, triple jump, backflip, long jump, slide, crawl, swim, crouch, punch, and kick. Damn, Mario's an acrobat in this game. And here I am thinking he's a plumber. And these moves aren't just for show. Mario's moveset is completely accommodated in this game's 15 sandbox style levels. I'll get to the levels in a bit, but now let's talk about the game when you first boot it up. Super Mario 64 makes a great first impression with how it starts off.
It's me, Mario!
And the title screen is pretty rad for a game from 1996. You have a giant Mario head in front of your face that you can stretch out to make something as hilarious as what I made about a year ago. Seriously, this needs to go in the museum. And this also marked the debut of voice acting in a mainline Mario game. From my understanding, this isn't the first ever Mario game with voice acting, but rather it's the first mainline Mario game with voice acting, and it's literally within the first 5 seconds of the game, and also in the intro and ending. The game doesn't really do that much voice acting, certainly not as much as Mario Sunshine, but it's here alright. Charles Martinet is the voice of Mario, and I honestly cannot see Mario with any other voice actor. He did a great job voicing Mario in this game and all Mario games afterwards. And Leslie Swan is the voice of Princess Peach in this game until she was eventually replaced by Jen Taylor, and I always forget how different the princess sounds in this game compared to other games. But now let's talk about the story. In pretty much every Mario game before this, the story revolves around Princess Peach getting kidnapped by Bowser, and the Mario Bros go on a quest throughout the Mushroom Kingdom to save her. But this time the story is slightly different. Here, Princess Peach invites Mario to her castle because she baked a cake for him. Never turned out a cake, guys. But when Mario arrives, the castle is completely empty and the princess is nowhere to be found. And apparently Luigi is nowhere to be found either because he's not a part of this adventure. Unless you have the dedication to try to manage to unlock him by collecting every single coin in the entire game, that is. Finally, the false fact alarm has a purpose. But anyways, the reason for the princess's absence is because Bowser, back to his old tricks again, kidnapped Peach somewhere in the castle walls and scattered the 120 power stars across the different worlds in the princess's castle, which serves as this game's hub world. I gotta give the developers credit though. They did a very good job making the castle grounds feel enjoyable to just jump around in and explore, making it one of my favorite hub worlds in any video game, to be honest. Now, my personal favorite hub world is Delfino Plaza from Super Mario Sunshine, Mario 64's successor, and I quite like Grunty's lair in Banjo-Kazooie, but the castle is still a great hub world. Now we get to the main levels. The main way of getting to the game's levels is by jumping into paintings scattered across the different rooms in the castle. It's a pretty interesting way to get to the different worlds, which I kinda like, but I personally prefer how Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door uses warp pipes to get to its different worlds. It just feels like a very Mario way to get around. But jumping into paintings still feels Mario-ish, just not as Mario-ish as using warp pipes. I should keep track of how many times I nitpick in this video. Now we can get to the levels. Super Mario 64 features 15 sandbox-style levels that you can explore and stay in as long as you want with no timer in sight. Thank God. And there's a pretty decent amount of variety of themed levels in this game too. You got the grassy summit, Bob-omb Battlefield, where you have to climb to the top of the summit and take on King Bob-omb, a notoriously easy boss. Whomp's Fortress is a bit smaller than Bob-omb Battlefield, but still good. Cool Cool Mountain and Snowman's Land are great winter stages, especially with Cool Cool Mountain featuring a mission where you have to bring a baby penguin back to its parent, or you could be evil and take it away after you bring it back. Okay, never mind, get away from me. Dire Dire Docks and Jolly Roger Bay are decent water levels with amazing music to go along with them, like holy crap that music is good. Koji Kondo, you sir made a soundtrack that still stands the test of time 25 years later. Give yourself a pat on the back. Dry Dry Desert is a fun desert level. Lethal Lava Land definitely fits the profile of being a good level, but the boss here is pretty disappointing. The first boss has you knocking a giant bully in the water, and the second boss fight features 3 mini bullies you have to take down and then the same big bully as before. Hazy Maze Cave is garbage. I just found traversing it to be more frustrating than fun, and the level's art style itself just looks bland. Big Boo's Haunt is a fine spooky themed level, but similarly to Lethal Lava Land, it features multiple boss fights that are essentially the same thing except with boos instead of bullies. But the level itself is perfectly fine. There's a merry-go-round here, and because of this I'm willing to forgive the level for having 3 of the same boss fights, and also for having this forsaken thing. Wet Dry World and Tiny Huge Island try switching things up with interesting gimmicks, like changing the sides of the island in Tiny Huge Island and controlling the height of the water in Wet Dry World. They're both interesting, and I'll be the first to say that more developers should take inspiration from them with their games, but I personally feel like they're not executed the best here. They're not executed terribly or anything, they just don't really feel that essential to the game. But Tall Tall Mountain is by far my favorite level in the game. You're climbing a mountain, and it's just so much fun to do, and so many obstacles keep it from feeling repetitive and boring. Again, this is a great level. Tick-Tock Clock is an interesting one. You're in a clock and you have to reach the top of it to grab a star. That's all Tick-Tock Clock is, that's all Tick-Tock Clock needs to be. It's a fun one, but also feels a bit more linear than the others. and every so often the mechanism stopped making this level stupid red coins mission much easier and manageable than before. And Rainbow Ride is also interesting as well, but it's a bit more tedious for me personally because you're riding a magic carpet and it's so slow. And when you fall off, oh boy, do I love not loving Nintendo right now. Rainbow Ride isn't bad, but it isn't great either. But that's all for the non-linear levels. There's still the linear levels that I didn't even start with, but because I spent so much time on the non-linear levels, I'll be brief here. You got the Castle's Secret Slide, there's the 3 Bowser levels, which features a boss fight at the end of each, which includes the final boss, and the cap levels. Unlike the 2D Mario games, Super Mario 64 does not feature any power-ups. His health is not determined by his size, but by a health meter. Finally, realism in my Mario games. And to make up for this, Mario 64 features different caps that Mario can equip to give him different abilities, like the wing cap basically turning Mario into a human airplane. The metal cap turns Mario into metal and lets him take less damage from enemies and obstacles, and also lets him walk at the bottom of water. And the invisibility cap makes Mario temporarily invisible and lets him walk through walls. Though the level you find the invisibility cap in all fairness, a fun level, but it doesn't really feel like it's made to take advantage of the invisibility cap's abilities all that much. There's just one part of the level that does, but most of the level is simply just a platforming challenge. Again, it's good, but compared to the other cap stages that are literally built around the cap's abilities, it's just kind of weird that this one doesn't really feel essential with the invisibility cap equipped. Wait a minute, there's no power-up caps in real life. Nintendo, you lied to me! I definitely think the caps do a pretty good job serving as this game's power-ups, but I just wish there was a bit more. Just imagine a fire cap serving as this game's fire flower, a cap that lets you shoot bombs from your cap. That would be awesome, but as it is now, they're a pretty fun change of pace. And they all have great music to accompany it. Nintendo, you've done it again. And as for the levels, they're really good. Some of them are hot garbage, like Hazy Maze Cave, but there's definitely more levels I like than I don't. And fun fact number 2, Super Mario 64 was originally planned to have more levels. I don't know the exact number of levels that were planned, but I do know that because Super Mario 64 and the Nintendo 64 itself was a cartridge-based system compared to the PlayStation and Sega Saturn, which used CDs, the developers couldn't fit all those levels into the game, and they unfortunately had to be scrapped since cartridges don't hold as much as CDs. Honestly, while I didn't really think about this until right now, I'm honestly disappointed that these extra levels didn't make it in. It would have been so cool, and Mario 64 would have been better because of them. But as it is now, 15 levels is still pretty hefty for a 3D platforming collectathon. Even now, it's just interesting to speculate how much greater Mario 64 would have been with more levels. But I think what 64 does that's really impressive for a 1996 3D platformer is offering infinite replay value. Mario 64's worlds, at least some of them, are just so much fun to run around in and explore if you're not super focused on collecting its collectibles. Mario 64's worlds aren't the biggest, but it's kinda cool the developers made it fun to just not do anything. And even if I already complete Mario 64, I still just really love running around this game's worlds and not doing anything. It's honestly impressive the developers were able to make the game fun even without the need of really collecting any of the game's collectibles. And speaking of collectibles, you can't mention Mario 64 without them. The main collectibles in Mario 64 are the Power Stars. They could be obtained by defeating a boss, completing an objective like beating Koopa the Quick in a race, or collecting 8 red coins or 100 coins in each of the game's 15 levels, which, by the way, were really fun to do. Oh yeah, and they also unlock more levels too, as if anyone cares about that. There's 120 Power Stars in total, and in addition to bragging rights, I collected all 120 of them a few years ago, and let me tell you, the 100% completion reward is pretty neat. But just for casual playthroughs, you only need 70. But I do have a bit of a flaw with the stars, being how every time you collect one, you immediately get sent back to the hub world. It's just a bit cumbersome, to be honest. Why not stay in the world after we collect the star? And Banjo-Kazooie, another Nintendo 64 3D platformer, came out just 2 years after the 64, and it does exactly that, making it a bit odd why Mario couldn't do it, even if these games are 2 years apart. Now, for games like Mario Galaxy that sent you back to the hub world every time you get a star, it's a bit more understandable since that game's levels are a bit more linear than 64's, and the levels change for each objective, so it makes sense in that aspect, but not in 64. But thankfully, this is something Super Mario Odyssey on the Nintendo Switch would address 20 plus years later, of course, why not? Now, to be fair, Odyssey features way more collectibles than 64, so I think the developers probably knew that sending you back to the Odyssey every time you got a moon would be more frustrating here than in 64, especially with how much bigger the worlds are in Odyssey, but it's still a minor annoyance here in 64. And now we get to the last part of the game. You've tackled all the worlds and all of Bowser's minions, now it's time for the final showdown on the top of the castle against the giant turtle that is Bowser. Well, I mean, I think he's a turtle. It's not easy to tell in 64 when he looks like whatever that's supposed to be. And after traversing the final challenge, we can finally duke it out against Bowser. This fight is very similar to the other two earlier in the game, but it's slightly challenging here with Bowser taking out parts of the battlefield and you having to grab him by his tail and throw him into the bombs scattered across the arena 3 times instead of 1. This is certainly not a hard boss. In fact, it's notorious for being not tough. The only part I found challenging was actually throwing Bowser into the bombs because I was spinning him so fast. But do that enough times, and once that's done, Mario grabs the giant star, returns back to the castle, and brings back the princess. And that, my fellow viewers, is Super Mario 64. A fantastic game with 0 flaws, and if you think I'm being biased, then I'm not. I really am not being biased, okay? Okay, fine. 64 does have some flaws that doesn't really hold up that well nowadays. Some levels aren't good, I think you got the idea on that one. The camera is annoying in certain parts, the stars sending you back to the hub is slightly irritating, and the visuals are not that great by today's standards, but that basically applies to every 3D game in the mid-90s. I know I went on a bit of a rant about the game's flaws, but I still think 64 is a great game with most of its levels being well designed, including the hub with fun objectives and capabilities, having ridiculously fun gameplay even 25 years later, and basically infinite replay value. There's no reason not to love 64, especially if you grew up with it. And throughout the past 25 years that this game has been a part of the gaming industry for, wow, that sentence didn't need to be that long, 64 is still a great game today that later Mario games and later games in general will take inspiration from for years to come. But what's even more impressive, people are still playing this game even today, especially speedrunners. Mario 64 has tons of glitches for speedrunners to get further in the game in a way that the game doesn't want you to, and it's always enjoyable to watch, and try even if you're bad at it like me. Especially the backwards long jump and the Bob-omb clip. Now in terms of sequels and remakes, Mario 64 would get a re-release in Japan in '97 that patched out a good majority of its glitches that speedrunners use and added the ability to use the Rumble Pack. The game got a sequel 6 years later on GameCube being Mario Sunshine. Mario 64 would get a remake/remaster on the DS in 2002, and Mario 64 got re-released on every modern home console Nintendo platform since the Wii through the system's Virtual Console service, except for the Switch, where the game would be included in a collection with 2 other games for Mario's 35th anniversary. And soon, Mario 64 will be added to Switch Online later this October along with a bunch of other Nintendo 64 games. Happy anniversary, Super Mario 64, and the Nintendo 64 itself. This will still remain to be one of my favorite games of all time and one of the best games of all time. Here's to 25 more. I guess. It's really hard to speculate if this game will still be remembered 50 years after launch. I would think since Nintendo acknowledges a lot of their older classics like Super Mario Bros. On NES and the original Legend of Zelda, but then again, as I say that, Nintendo has yet to remember classics like F-Zero and Star Fox. I promised myself I wouldn't shed a tear after that sentence. Don't look at me! But anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please consider subscribing and checking out my other videos on my channel where you'll find more videos like this one. And I'll see you next time.